you who I am. So I'm the co-founder, sole artist of Deli Interactive. That's our own little company here in Utah. And games pay my bills. So I take scope budget very seriously. I've been a full-time indie for a little over a year and a half. And I've always been the only artist on any given team. So this should help paint what perspective this is coming from. Hopefully that's enough asterisks so you know if this is potentially ruinous advice for you. And these are the games I've made, or the games I've worked on. So We Need to Go Deeper is sort of the flagship game that funds most of my career, if you will. It's an early access, roguelike, cooperative game underwater, and it's done really well. It's I think now sold over about 100,000 copies, and has funded our company for the foreseeable future of at least we have like a runway of a couple of years or so. So we'll have to make it work. And then other games I've worked on that are a little smaller scale with other developers here. I've worked on Lonely Astronaut, which is like an arcade game where you play as a corpse in space. And Doodle Date was a game I made by myself, partially out of spite for the entire dating sim genre. I'll tell you more about that one later. So what is an art pipeline? A lot of people mean different things when they talk about this, but for our purposes, we mean it's the context for what it takes for something to go from concept to a final working asset. More specifically, people, whenever they bring it up, they're always bringing it up in reference to the streamlining of this process. So an efficient pipeline, that's pretty much all everyone talks about. Most of the time, when it's brought up, the streamlining of this process, it has a very tool-centric focus of discussion. People are usually talking about character designers or level editing tools or shaders or all kinds of technical stuff. And basically, in the context of what they're talking about, this is more about kind of greasing the wheels of production and making this whole process go faster under the assumption that we have usually a team of people who are experts in each field. So you have your expert concept artists, your expert designers and modelers, and then they pass it on to maybe some tech artists who are going to help rig it up and do different things to make it into a functioning asset. And tools assist that process. So that's great if you're a studio and you're full of lots of experts and people. But if you're one dude, this is very different. So to me, this conversation, the very tool-centric approach, is akin to talking about all these fancy ways that you can save money when going to a fancy restaurant. When you could just cook at home and not eat at a fancy restaurant. So that's sort of what I'm going to be talking about today. The broader focus of an art pipeline and making it efficient is that the plan around it constrains how big it is to begin with. And so affordable art pipelines have more to do with planning than tools, at least in my experience. So my steps for planning an affordable pipeline are as follows: picking the right project, budgeting your resources, unifying with style, and testing the waters. Now they're in this order because it's kind of convenient for the sake of this presentation, but in reality they're going to bounce back and forth. They all kind of feed into each other. So just something to keep in mind is that it's not like a strictly step-by-step process. It's just kind of, these are the things you should be thinking about. So with that, let's go into the first one, picking the right project, or admitting you suck at stuff. So as an indie, you have a choice. You're not handed a project. You're not said, make this work somehow. You get to pick what you work on. And that's kind of your most powerful ability. So you should choose wisely. If we look to the magic of Disney, they have a lesson to teach us that we should not try new things. And that's a terrible, terrible life philosophy and a terrible thing to teach kids in 2 movies, not 1. But it has some merit in this case when you're a scrappy indie who needs to pick a project that's going to fit their skill set. So, you're not Neo, You're not going to be good at everything as much as you try, and it's actually a little bit insulting to other artists if you think that you can be great at every step in the process. You know, Santa put a ton of effort and time into perfecting Christmas, so you are not going to waltz in and, you know, do it out of sheer enthusiasm. So that, and of course, a healthy reminder that the market is slightly competitive these days. 7.7 thousand games were released on Steam in 2017. This is not counting all the other games that were released on mobile, all the other things that are released on Netflix and YouTube, and like literally you're competing with everyone who's vying for people's attention. So with that, you can't really afford to not be your best. So you got to play up your strengths and hide the rest. Sweep it under the rug. Slime Rancher is a great example of this. The developers of Slime Rancher mentioned that they're very bad at animating, and so they made a game where everything's a blob. So you squash and stretch it, and you replace the faces on it, and boom, it's animated. Great. Now we don't have to worry. It's also first person, so you can't see your character model. So they got to focus on their strengths, which were level design and modeling and making things look cute, and not worry at all, basically, about most of the animation deals they would have had to deal with. Similarly, when it comes to hiding your weaknesses, all the way to turning it into a strength, Scott Cawthorn of Five Nights at Freddy's fame, he had made a dozen other games before Five Nights at Freddy's, in which he tried to make cute, kid-friendly games. And the feedback he always got was that it looked creepy and weird. And he was not a very good modeler, so he made the game that just made those weaknesses a strength. And then coming back to my game, Dual Date, I released this recently, so like I said, I was sort of spiteful of how well the dating sim genre was doing, partially because I can't draw attractive people. So even if I wanted to, I can't dive into this market. However, if I make you do it, that's a different story. So Doodle Date's concept was that you draw your date, and then you date your dream date, who you drew, who was probably a crappy stick figure, but now it's funny, so. Okay, so next step, once you've sort of realized your strengths and weaknesses, budgeting your resources, or you can't afford anything. So to simplify this part of the talk, because budgeting your art is kind of a broad subject, I've sort of simplified it down into 4 Ds, because we like cute, everything's a D. So definition, dimension, dynamics, and depth. As the bar goes up, it gets more expensive, and it's the least expensive at the bottom. So I'll explain what each of these actually mean. So definition is characterized by the fidelity, visual polish, and detail your game has. So at the top you got stuff like HD pores and beautifully complex art, even if it's pixel art. Like, I don't care, it takes just as much time to do that as it does to take an impressionism painting. And at the bottom, you got like Pong, its box, just bare basics, bare bones as far as definition goes. At the top of dimension, this one's simple, it's just characterized by a degree of 3D-ness. So pure 3D, simply meaning everything, pretty much everything is a 3D asset. And then pure 2D, everything's a 2D asset in a 2D plane. Everything in between is sort of your 2.xds. So, your Dooms and your Minecrafts and anything that will heavily use 2D assets in a 3D space kind of falls into that category. Dynamics are characterized by flexibility and interactivity. So this is kind of the tech artistry side of things. This is sort of your IK rigs and your things that make your assets dynamic and flexible. So at the top here, we've got stuff like Grow Home, where the character, every body part of the character moves dynamically, and it's sort of designed that way. You've got things like deformable terrain, and at the bottom you've got a static drawing. This is most of your dating sims. They can't even really animate. They just kind of switch drawings. They can't really be placed outside of their intended purpose. So yeah, wherever your assets can kind of be flexible enough to do lots of different things, that's how dynamic your assets are. Depth is characterized by the amount of stuff in your game. So that one's simple. Just you got whole worlds to make, so just lots of crap you got to put in your game. Or one thing, it's like a Tamagotchi. You got to make the Tamagotchi, and that's it. You made it, as far as art goes. So, as an indie, you can't have all the nice things. This is just a fact of indie life. You're unless you have a huge budget, these things are all very expensive. And so, instead of trying to have all of them, you got to pick and choose. So these are various indie games and the sacrifices they have made on these 4Ds. So Stories Untold is a very AAA looking game. It's super polished looking game about sitting at a desk. So basically, they wanted all this. They wanted all that nice, juicy AAA polish. So they got rid of all this. Dynamics and depth both took a huge dive. We don't need much dynamics because we're sitting at a desk, and maybe the most we need these computer monitors to do is like turn knobs and click and stuff like that. And depth, there's not much to make. This screenshot probably has literally everything they made in their game. So very scoped down. On the other end, you maybe want to make a huge world, then your definition or something else is going to take a dive. So Minecraft decided we're going to just not worry about definition. Everything's going to be blocks and big chunky pixels, super simple. And even the dimension takes a little bit of a dive. A lot of things are 2D assets in Minecraft, a lot of drops and stuff. They don't have to make 3D models of all these things. And then dynamics are as good as they need to be to make this sort of modular world, but like there's no IKs to speak of. Everyone moves, rigidly and stiffly. Point-and-click adventure games kind of take a different route. They obviously decide strip dimension entirely. We're going to make it 2D. 3D assets are expensive, and focus all on definition. So everything's going to look like a beautiful, super detailed painting. But again, things take a dive. Dynamics take a little bit of a dive the higher that definition gets, because it's going to be harder to plan for all these different things these characters can do. So, this bull riding animation is going to happen once. It's going to happen right here. It's not going to happen anywhere else. You can't dynamically ride bulls or fences throughout the world. And generally, these games are also pretty short. You'll notice that point-and-click adventure games have a shorter lifespan, and they also are often released episodically because they can only make so much content at once. So we need to go deeper. So this is kind of the sacrifices we made. We had high depth goals right at the start. So we knew we wanted lots of different outfits for the players to be able to wear. We knew we wanted lots of different creatures and monsters and stuff to populate our kind of roguelike world with, so that it was very replayable. And so definition and dynamics both kind of fought each other the whole part of development. Anytime we wanted to make something more defined, oh great, well now they can't have as many joints because making that many joints with that many outfits is ridiculous for one person, right? So these are the sacrifices we made. So now we've got our budget, we've sort of got, we know what we're good at. Now we've got to try to combine them in a way that looks cohesive. So unifying with style, or it's supposed to look like that. Oh. So style is sort of the mortar of the indie world. It ties together and it just masks all of your horrible flaws. And there's a million and one ways that can be accomplished. Chances are, if you look outside of games, you're going to find many different art styles which are perhaps closer to your natural art style, or your tendencies, or help cover up your flaws, because all these artists have also had flaws that they inevitably covered up. I don't know if you've ever looked at a lot of H.R. Geiger's work, but he really likes to not draw feet. So they're very infrequently there. So looking around in general is always a good idea, especially outside the realm of games. But within the realm of games, there are some common style tricks that indies like to pull a lot to help cover up some of their production value woes. So artifice, abstraction, and humanity are three I've chosen to talk about. basically arbitrarily. So artifice is a common one. Again, I've mentioned it with Five Nights at Freddy's, but to reiterate, it's basically something is fake. Something looks fake because it's supposed to look fake, because it is fake in the context of the game. So, he had these kind of plasticky, unnatural looking models, so they're animatronics. They're supposed to look like that. Perfect. You got Super Hot with its virtual world. You can basically do anything if you say you're in a virtual world. So everything very much looks intentionally artificial within Super Hot. And then you have your whole span of retro games, which this only specifically kind of covers the retro games that are very specifically emulating a very one kind of game in history. So like here, Quake is the go-to. And I call this artifice because everything is excused by the fact that if it looked like that in Quake, it gets to look like that here. So as long as it's accurate to the artificial product, then it looks good. Abstraction is another common one. So this is just the idea that what you're looking at is representative but not literal. So, Prison Architect has these really simple blobby characters that don't really, on their own, don't really look good or detailed or anything, but they help you fill in the blanks yourself by doing things like, throughout the game, including portraits and descriptions that kind of imply that there's more to this game than you're actually looking at. And so it lets your imaginations fill in the blanks. Same with Undertale. It's very deliberately simple, very descript heavy. That's not a word. Anyway, and then Binding of Isaac does a lot of this as well. It's very intentionally simplistic so that you kind of fill in the gory details in your mind. Humanity is another trick. This one's a little harder to explain, but that's why Gromit's here, because he's not in a game, or he probably is, but it probably sucks. He's not in a game, but this screenshot of him, you can see the fingerprints on the clay, and the people at, I forget what they're called, Aardman, they have talked about how they do this deliberately to remind you subconsciously that people have made this. This is a handcrafted movie. You're looking at something that's been made by dozens of people, and literally their fingerprints are on the work. So games accomplish this by having styles that remind you of physical mediums like paint or line work, pencil drawings. And I think what this does is it creates empathy in the viewer, and it reminds them that this was created by people, and it reminds them of something they've seen in reality. So it makes them look at the game's, goings on. Oh my God, I can't say words. It makes them see the game as a piece of art rather than like a representation of any kind of reality. So, testing the waters, art prototyping. This is basically just where you start trying out your ideas. Function over fashion. So concept art fits into this. This is where the actual this is the stage where the actual pipeline starts to come into it. A quick note on what a lot of us know to be concept art is that concept art that looks like this only looks like this in studios for the most part, for a very good reason, and that's because it's usually about communicating something very big to dozens of other team members. When you're by yourself, this isn't quite as important, and it's not something you need to worry about. You don't need to worry about these super high-polished concept art, and in fact, I think it can be detrimental. I'll talk about that. Here's what my concept art looks like. Super simple, just usually line work or reference pictures that just tell you what I'm aiming for. And usually just, again, the function is the same. It's to usually communicate something to team members, but because I'm not trying to communicate to other artists, I very often just, all I have to do is like say, okay, yeah, this is how this enemy is going to work, okay? And it'll probably look like this. Great. It's got to come out tomorrow, so great. And stuff like this is just me experimenting with like, oh, if I just make them circles, like, can they still look cute if they're just a circle? Like that's all I need to know. So it just takes a line drawing to do that. So here's why I think concept art can be detrimental, and it's that it causes you to want to daydream about like the perfect look, where I think working in Engine, just starting to throw assets together and slap them together in Engine as art prototyping keeps you grounded in reality and lets you focus on what can be accomplished and not what could be accomplished. And it also immediately starts to familiarize yourself with the way the engine works and with the tools that are already available. So these are all art prototypes I've made for various projects. Not all of them saw the light of day. This is just some desert survival thing. This is a game we were working on in the future. This is another game I'm working on with another company. These are all just made in Engine to see if I can, make it look good without throwing a bunch of Photoshop layers over it. And of course, like I said, it also forces you to feel out the fastest ways to work and discover the appropriate tools that will help you. So, jumping in and just doing it lets you find some shortcuts that you might not have thought of otherwise. So, like with this guy right here, we're working on this thing where, you need lots of different perspectives on these little characters to run around. And I was like, that's hard. Can I just make them spheres and then slap 2D assets on the spheres and we just change those? So, sometimes laziness will beget something new. That one hasn't come out yet, so it might be a huge failure. Going over it again, so these are the steps: picking the right project, budgeting resources, unifying the style, and testing the waters. You're going to go back and forth on all these again, and you should, but eventually, hopefully, you come out of this with some sort of confident plan. So confident that plan has the correct orientation on its end. And then there's just one last step, which is just charge Nick dang gang. You just do it. You just get in there. And you got your big spear. It's made out of plan. You can just stab it all at once. It's tiny now. Now you can destroy it. And enjoy your home-cooked meal. So, thank you.